Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Terry Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group, and I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant issues of the day in HR. We like to help you make sense of what they mean, and we also like to talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Caitlin McGregor, CEO and co-founder of Plum. I first met Caitlin, I think last year at HR Tech, and was immediately struck by her passion and excitement for helping individuals reach their true potential. So she built a company to help organizations do the same thing. And I wanted to have a conversation with her about that. So welcome, Caitlin. Great to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
I know you have some thoughts, because we talked a little bit about it, regarding the current labor crisis and all the things that are going on in the market that we're dealing with, and wanted to get your take on that and what organizations are doing to mitigate some of these challenges. Does that sound like a good plan to you for today's show?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, then let's get into the huddle. Yeah, so there's a lot of mixed messages out there right now. But by most accounts, fewer jobs will be filled this year over last year. And they're also saying that for every 2 job openings, there's only one unemployed person, right? One of the highest ratios, or maybe the highest ratio ever recorded by BLS. What are you seeing as the real problem? Like, what problem are we trying to solve here? And what do you think are some of the key issues?
Yeah, you really nailed it with that ratio. The way we talk about this is a leaky bucket problem. There's just not enough supply of labor at the top that can fill all those unfulfilled roles. Depending on what statistic you're looking at, it's around, give or take, 11 million unfilled jobs in the US alone. And it really is that there just aren't enough people that have that, what we've seen in the past, those done it already. They have the qualifications, eligibility to fill all of those unfulfilled jobs. So we're at a point where we need to start looking at labor that have those transferable skills that aren't necessarily somebody that's done that role in the past, and start looking at who could do that role if given the opportunity. So we're at a point where there's just not enough skilled talent to fill all of the unfulfilled roles. But at the same time, there's another problem that's going on. And that's that when you do hire somebody into a role, they're not staying for the 3, 5, 7 years that we've historically seen workers stay. People are putting on their resume that they were at a job for 3 months or 6 months, and that's worth actually disclosing, because that isn't something shameful anymore. People are walking with their feet and going to companies where they feel appreciated and they feel like there's a chance to grow. And so if they're in an organization and they're not feeling like their talents are being utilized and they're not feeling fulfilled, they will leave to the next company that can potentially offer that. Because right now, people don't have to move to new geographies to go and work at the headquarters of a new corporation. They can work for anybody from anywhere. There's enough choice because there's just not enough labor. That individual worker has way more power than we've ever seen before. And they're using that power to leave. And so there's a massive problem with retention right now. So can't find enough supply of talent to fill that top of the bucket. But there's a hole in the bucket where you're losing people at the fastest rate than we've ever seen. And there's no end of that stopping. Even with the slowdown that we have seen and the layoffs that we've seen in certain sectors, this problem isn't going away, and it's just going to get worse. We are adding more jobs than we are people. And this is going to continue to be a problem where we're trying to incentivize people to change careers, go into other areas where you just can't get enough people and can't keep them, which means employers need to start changing how they work on retaining employees.
Well, it's interesting that so many employers have now gone back to, you need to come back to the office, right? And people are really pushing back on that. They've created this lifestyle over that couple of years of work from home that going back into an office just doesn't work anymore, at least not every day, right? So there's some of that organizations have been more flexible, but it's really just changing the way people work and people are looking for jobs that can be more flexible.
And it's interesting because there are options. If people don't want to return into the office, they will go and find an employer that will allow them that flexibility. And I don't think that the pushback is happening all at once. I think employers are waiting and seeing how much compliance they're going to get from their employees. And so I think that the impacts of really the demands of making people go back to the office, I don't think we've seen the impact of that yet. They haven't been able to track, okay, how many people did we lose as a result of this? What has happened in terms of attracting the right people into the organization? I don't think anybody's measuring the true impact on the bottom line. I think right now they're just like, how many people are coming back into the office? Oh, we had 10% coming back. Now we have 60%. We're winning. Yay, as a company, we're forcing them back to the office. They're not actually looking yet at the long-term impacts. And that will really be the true testament as to whether or not this is a strategy whereas employers try to pull back the power into their court if they're successful or not. And I think it's too early to call it as to whether or not they'll really win. I think the genie's out of the bottle. I think that this ratio of not enough people to fill jobs means that long-term employers are going to have to recognize they have to do everything in their power to hold on to the talent they have. And that means they've got to be a lot more creative than just going back to what we were doing before.
Yeah. I also saw something just kind of almost the reverse to some extent where, and we're a small business, so we employ a lot of young people just coming out of school and things like that. And just our little microcosm experience has been that these Gen Zs, they really actually want to go to the office because they're not getting much situational learning talking to me over Zoom, right? So that's been a challenge we've seen where people come in, work for a year, and then they get a nice job where they get to go to the office. And that has been actually in some of our discussions as they're leaving is, well, one of the things was I needed an office to go to. And I think it's the situational learning thing and the opportunity to create mentors and actually see how work is done. And so there's some dynamics there from a demographics perspective, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that some of that can be accounted for in terms of how you build your remote workforce. How do you provide cross-departmental exposure? How do you have great mentorship? I think it just, one of the lessons of hybrid work that came out in the last couple of years after looking at the long tail kind of impact was that most companies aren't good at the in-between. You either are really good at in-person or you're really good at remote. But if you have to do hybrid, it's like you now have to do three things. You have to be good at remote, you have to be good at in-person, and you need to be good at bringing those two worlds together. Because sometimes if you're not in the office every single day, you actually are you have to be good at all three of those. And that's expensive. That means that all your programming is 3 times and your lessons learned, you're learning different lessons for different things. And so we had been fully in person, never thought that I'd be running a fully remote company. Then, because like everybody else with COVID, we were forced to be fully remote. And then we played around for a little bit with that hybrid, kind of trying to do all three. And it was just way too difficult to be a master, to be the best workplace in all 3 categories. So we decided that as we wanted to increase our supply of talent and be able to hire from anywhere, that one of the best things we could do was to go fully remote and really own being the best fully remote location. But you have to change. It's a different muscle. You have to change how you do things. You have to change how you're using technology to enable that. And I think that a lot of companies haven't necessarily thought about from that younger generation, what is their experience and how can this be a place that competes with an in-person, and what are the things that they would be looking at from a hierarchy of needs? I think a lot of people want those in-person connections, especially if they're young, they want to have exposure, but there's other things that they want too. And so it's really about, if you can nail 4 out of 5 of the things they're looking for, then going in the office may not be worth it if you can fulfill all those other needs. But I don't think people are looking at it from, have we changed how we operate to really excel at remote? And I think a lot of companies said, well, we're not going to. We're just going to force everybody back to the office and do what we were doing before. And they are exercising their authority to get compliance. And I don't think it's going to be as successful long-term as most people expect. And I think it's too early for us to, they're trying it. Employers are trying it. Doesn't mean it's going to be successful.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And especially as the commercial real estate market collapses as a result of a lot of people not going back to the office. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. I guess we'll watch and see what happens. So how do you see this impacting? What are organizations doing to fill these gaps, right? Because we do have, like I said, 2 jobs for every 1 person. What are you seeing organizations doing to try to fill this gap?
I think the leading organizations right now are recognizing that talent management is a key part of this solution. I think a lot of organizations have had much bigger talent acquisition budgets. When you think about sourcing, they've had a lot more maturity in terms of their processes, procedures, personnel around talent acquisition. So talent management, really good, mature talent management processes, you only find often with much bigger companies that have the time, the resources, the history to have invested in talent management. It often is very secondary. We see constantly in the market, it's kind of been the neglected second child next to talent acquisition. So I think there's this big awakening that holding on to the people that you do have is critical. Not creating more and more empty roles in your organization is starting with plugging that bucket. And so there has been this awareness and this investment in how to retain your people. And there is this acknowledgement that requires active investment in people and in the process and procedures. And so I think that recognizing that you can start by offering growth. Most people will stay at their organization if they see a path for growth in that organization. And to the flip side, most people will leave if they feel like they're stagnant and there isn't that opportunity for growth. So there's many different ways to help grow somebody. And we're starting to see kind of companies embracing that from different angles. And we can get into that. But I would say that's kind of the first part, is focusing on retention. The second part is that companies are recognizing that just hiring people who have done the job before isn't going to cut it. There's just not enough of them. So there's this big push for companies to become skills-based organizations. And I think what skills-based organization means is more that they are embracing this concept that they want to give people the opportunity to use their transferable skills to do something that they may not have done in the past. And I think that is the right way of thinking about it. The issue is, how do you actually action on that? And I would say most companies are early in that journey of trying to figure out what that looks like in practice. And what we're seeing is that there's kind of 2 different approaches to this so far in the market. And one is recognizing that before we had skills-based organizations, we look at job boards and ATSs and human capital management systems. The way that people were matched to jobs up until now has been some form of resume parsing and taking a bag of keywords from a resume and a bag of keywords from a job description and matching them together. And so now, instead of saying, I need somebody that's already done this job before, we're looking at what are those keywords that are 1 or 2 degrees away, but you're still coming back to a whole bunch of keywords being matched up with each other. And in the age of ChatGPT, you can say, this is the job description. This is my resume. Give me a perfect cover letter. Give me a perfect resume that has all of the keywords that are going to get past those first screens and are going to make that match. And I think the real opportunity is saying we have all acknowledged that the structured interview is the place where the rubber hits the road and we really understand, is this person going to be somebody that we should move forward and consider actually hiring? But nobody's really evaluating how we're getting to that structured interview. And I think there's this appetite to finally change who's coming into that structured interview, to open that aperture and start screening in people we wouldn't have necessarily looked at before. But how are we screening in those people before the structured interview? And that's where I'm seeing that the landscape have different options. One is some form of keyword matching, and that's really looking still at, hey, if you volunteered at a hospital when you were in high school, I'm going to recommend you now for a nursing job or for something in healthcare. But that still doesn't mean that you're going to be good at the job or enjoy that job or be the best person out of the 100 or 1,000 that applied to do that job. Whereas what we've really been focusing on is the science of industrial organizational psychology and looking at, for the longest time, the industry's been saying it's all about these long-term transferable soft skills or innate talents, things like innovation and communication and execution. What is it that gets somebody out of bed in the morning excited about their job, that if you give them the opportunity to utilize those talents, they're going to outperform their peers, they're going to be happy, fulfilled, they're going to thrive in the role, meaning they're going to stay longer? How do we start using that data to screen in somebody's potential, that if you gave them the opportunity, they would be the person that would be the most successful and stay the longest? And so we're looking at trying to change that initial data of how you're screening in people to that structured interview. And that's really saying, if you're trying to become a skills-based organization, this is the first data you need to truly understand the humans behind the work. And that can apply to all of your job applicants, but that also can apply back to your people. How are you growing them? Well, understanding where you can really set them up to excel is the same solution if it's talent acquisition or talent management. But it's a step change for organizations, because we've all talked about these durable skills or power skills or soft skills or talents, whatever word you want to use. And companies are now open to wanting to be a skills-based organization, but they're not necessarily taking advantage of the opportunity that we can now quantify this data and use it to solve this problem.
Yeah. I think we're hearing that a lot, right? Competencies was always the big thing, although that was very labor intensive. And so now skills-based organizations and this whole idea of managing skills is starting to bubble up. How are people managing that? Like, talk about the data side of this and how we really make this kind of data available to the people who need it to make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts with the individual. Yes, this is about getting data on candidates and employees, data that companies don't currently have. But again, back to the power balance, who's benefiting from this data? And if you start with the perspective of the individual that you're asking for this data is going to be the first person to benefit from it, that this is something that you're providing an extra resource, you're providing an extra opportunity. This is something that they are going to own their own data on themselves, but share it with the company. You can really incentivize and motivate the person to want to be part of this process. So in our case, it's a single untimed 20, 25-minute psychometric assessment that assesses for problem solving and social intelligence and personality in a way that you can't fake or game, that creates a profile in just 20, 25 minutes for that individual. And that's their profile. They can share it on LinkedIn. They can share it when they are applying to different employers, when they're thinking about their own internal career development, when they're thinking about internal mobility opportunities. This is data that they can use to advocate for themselves. And it's incredibly easy to understand and very deep in terms of the recommendations, in terms of the insights. It allows people to grow their self-reflection and insights. But that data is then shared with the prospective employer or their current employer. But it started with they got value first, that they got this, the individual got that ROI for taking the time to complete this assessment. And then this is helpful information to ensure that the employer is matching them to the right job where they're going to be successful and they're going to be seen for opportunities they weren't going to be considered for in the past, because on paper, it wouldn't have shown that they are the best match for this job or this department that they may not have already been exposed to in the past.
Right. I mean, most people write a resume based on something they saw somebody else do, right? And they look for all the right words to say and the things they think, these are things I know how to do, but may not be descriptive of the kinds of things that they could do or they would be capable of. I mean, a lot of these things that I see coming around the corner are things that really nobody's done before, right? So it's all going to be new with AI and some of the other work as we evolve into the next generation, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
You see it with titles like Ruby on Rails developers. We know that 6 years ago, we couldn't hire enough Ruby on Rails developers, and they were getting the highest developer software salaries. And it was a really big shortage because everybody needed to hire one. Now, nobody hires Ruby on Rails developers unless you're trying to keep alive some legacy piece of software like that. That language has completely died, and that is not a valuable skill. But if you knew that you had a developer that was really fast at learning new languages or was very senior, so once they've learned a new language, they could be off to the races. We use Angular, and we hired a couple of people who that wasn't the tech stack they were used to, but we knew they would learn quickly on the job. We knew that they could handle complexity. We knew that they had all the other things that once they grabbed that language, they would be off to the races and highly successful. So a lot of the times you're seeing things like prompt engineer. Nobody went to school to be a prompt engineer. Nobody had that on their resume a year ago. It's really about can you find somebody who is going to fall in love with prompt engineering and keep self-learning and keep going to the boundaries of that emerging profession and keep growing with as that profession evolves. Like, it's about the right fit for somebody that is going to have the foundation to be successful. And a lot of companies are looking at this from a upskilling opportunity too. How do you take the people you already have and fill your roles by providing some of that upskilling internally? And everybody says, oh yeah, that's part of the equation. Yes, we need to upskill. But are they selecting the people that are going to be the most likely to be successful once they've been upskilled? So there's really that initial matching people to the right roles. There's a whole opportunity to look at it differently than's been done before. Not that the hard skills and past experience is irrelevant, but we have been providing, I think, too much weight too early in the process for it to be the deciding factor. It's like reference checks. You're not doing reference checks on every single person at the very beginning. You're using it later in the process. I think we need to start recognizing that you're not going to get enough people into jobs if you're only looking for the ones that have already done it. So can we look at people's potential and their ability to excel if given the opportunity, and then say, okay, of these people that are here that have all this potential, I'm going to now narrow down the list even more based on other factors. Like, we know all the time that sometimes you're not hiring the person with the most years of experience. You're hiring somebody with a little bit less because there's other circumstances like salary, or the role is changing rapidly. So you want a bit more of a clean slate. Like, there's lots of reasons why when we shortlist, we further shortlist to meet our needs. I think we should be thinking about some of that past experience as some of that secondary screening in, and be giving more weight to those transferable soft skills than I think the industry has in the past. And I think it's out of necessity. We don't have a choice. And especially if you're looking at retaining your existing employees, I laugh when people that are senior in their career are given opportunities to completely change departments, completely change their subject matter expert. They'll take somebody from HR and put them in marketing, or they'll take somebody from operations and put them in HR. And we take these big risks on senior talent, but there's the biggest opportunity to take those risks when somebody's early in their career or mid in their career and you're trying to retain them. So how do we start showing who is worth taking those risks on, ideally as early as possible in their career? And it requires a different data set, but it also requires buy-in from the person to see that this is in their best self-interest.
Yeah. You mentioned the individual, and I mean, I like that. I think people need to be in ownership of the things that make them and how they can contribute to an organization. How does that data follow them, that assessment data?
It does. Yeah. And GDPR and all of the new privacy laws in the last few years have really helped support that employers are actually happy now to know that data belongs to the individual. It actually helps them be more compliant. And effectively, that individual is sharing, giving permission for others to see it, but it's under their control and it moves with them. And the reality is that a person doesn't change based on changing companies or changing job titles. Who they are by the age of about 22, 23, in terms of where they get their sense of self-worth and where they get their most fulfillment, those are pretty set. You can learn coping strategies, you can bring in new experiences, but the things that truly make you exceptional and the things that drain you and potentially lead to burnout, those things are pretty set. And so being able to quantify those and take them with you from job to job is definitely the key priority. Because if we believe that when people flourish, business thrives, if you can really take care of those individuals and set them up for success, the business will benefit from that. But I think a lot of the past thinking has been still, and we're seeing it kind of reemerge, this top-down command and control, do as I say, I'm the one with the power, I'm asking for this stuff because it's going to benefit the corporation. And it's like, no, if you actually support that individual first, set them up for success, help them lead their own development, for them to be more empowered to express where they can be most successful, the business will benefit because they've increased retention, because they've been able to differentiate in the market and attract the best talent. So there's a real opportunity to, start with that individual and look at, I think individual led is really the future of talent management and improving talent acquisition.
Are you seeing organizations do things differently in terms of how they engage people in some of these other opportunities? Because people get into a job and they get into their silo, and sometimes they're not going to ask, hey, I want to do something different. But I think it's incumbent upon the organization to expose people to different things so that they have the opportunity to see how the organization works and where they might be able to best contribute. On the flip side, how do we help managers to see the big picture, right? How do we help them see who are the people that we could move around and really grow them as well as grow the organization?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing some of the pushback that we hear about in the industry is the manager will never let their best people go into other teams or other departments. And one of the changes is, well, those people are leaving anyway. Like if you're not going to let them move internally, they're just going to leave the organization, hence the really bad turnover that that companies are experiencing. So, they're going to leave one way or another. The question is, would you rather retain them in the company or lose them entirely to a competitor? So the company is having to recognize that their people is their most important intellectual property, and it doesn't belong to a manager and it doesn't belong to a department. The company really needs to optimize their IP, and that means they need to support them with the development and mobility if they're going to hold on to them. So managers kind of being told, no, you don't get to hold on to your people anymore. They don't belong to you, is something that has to be expressed from the top. Simultaneously, we're working with and have for years Foundever that used to be called Citel, and there are 170,000 employees across 26 countries. They were really committed to developing their employees and providing intermobility opportunities. But how do you do that with so many people across so many different geographies? And they invested in Plum to really create that common language, that common data set, but also paired it with how do they empower the individual so that the individual is not waiting for their manager. It's not about the manager using this data on a daily basis. It's about the individual communicating their strengths, communicating where they need better support, communicating their differences and similarities with their colleagues, using this data in their day-to-day interactions, bringing it forward into their one-on-ones, bringing it forward into their career coaching conversations. So they really built a whole strategy on empowering that individual to take responsibility to be the CEO of their own career development, which is not, I think, the kind of the type of programs that I've seen in other companies. It's very top down. This is a specific initiative, a specific program. We're going to have managers implement it. And it's this top down approach. Whereas really the success that we've seen in many companies is more of this bottom up empowerment, because if they're bringing it into the one-on-one conversations, then the manager's going to going to think about it. If they're bringing it up with, this is how I see myself, we're seeing that some of the engagement rates with some of the internal mobility tools in the market that are focused on an employee just adding a whole bunch of keywords to their profile and seeing what jobs internally match those keywords. We're seeing that the engagement rates at best sometimes are 40%. And then that can be that somebody's logged in once a year. So I think there's a desire to facilitate more of this internal development and internal mobility, but you've got to make it so that the individual is benefiting enough from it that they are actually engaging with it. And so really focusing on that experience and that benefit to the individual has been key in the process, but it requires thinking about it from how do we benefit that individual first and foremost.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you that it comes from the top, that they've got to create that environment, that culture of empowerment and people wanting to figure out the best way to do things, not being told this is how it's done, but how do we get this done in the best, most efficient way to deliver on the organization's objectives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is AI? I always like to ask this question. Have you seen anything change recently with ChatGPT and just sort of the whole generative AI concept? I'm sure there's a lot of AI in your technology in terms of how you parse some of this out, but have you seen some changes over the last few months just with things that are changing in the market in general?
I think that generative AI is, as some employers, not all, but as some employers try to regain the power into their court, I think generative AI is another piece to put on the individual side. Like it can really empower an individual to be able to do so much more. There's a few months ago, a guy applied to 200 jobs in a single day using a ChatGPT hack to apply to all these jobs through chatbot. So it definitely, I think, makes it easier for people to find a different job. It makes it easier for people to pick up on new jobs and have the context to learn rapidly about new things. It's creating new job opportunities like prompt engineers, for example. I think that it's going to be as revolutionary as it was to have smartphones. So if you can imagine life before our computers were in our pocket and the limitations we had, and then the boost in productivity was massive by introducing smartphones. I think generative AI is going to increase productivity between 10 to 25% for the individuals. So I think there's a huge opportunity for somebody who is doing well in their job to do even better. I think that if somebody's not doing well in their job, it's an opportunity to say, if you could get into a job where you're really using what makes you exceptional and using something like generative AI in addition, you could be such a better performer. So I think, it gives that individual the ability to do even more faster and better and be more productive, which can make them even more of an asset that a company does not want to lose. And they will go somewhere where they are appreciated. So I think, and it also means that individual can also game the system more. And really, like, we have a lot of bad practices in talent acquisition, for example, with that keyword matching, where people have known for a long time it's not the best system, but they haven't been forced to change it. And so I think that part of COVID, part of post-COVID, part of generative AI is that it is forcing the status quo to change. It's that whatever we've been doing up until now is not good enough. And I think it just adds to the argument that we've got to be thinking about not just going back to pre-2020 and holding on to some of those things, but really looking at how is a company going to win? How are they going to really differentiate and stand out? And if they don't have the talent, then banks can't open branches, restaurants can't open for breakfast. Like, if you don't have talent, you can't grow as a business. So the biggest priority should be right now, how do they modernize their talent strategy to take into consideration that if you put people in the right roles, they can be even more productive and even more outperform, and technology is going to make your best people even better. So it's, I think, amazing opportunity. And I am seeing things change. And it definitely is something where there's an opportunity to contextualize data even more, which is, instead of data being one and done, which so much in HR is one and done. It's a real tragedy where we do all this work and then what? It doesn't go anywhere. It dies. And we've been working
on the shelf. Yep.
It sits on the shelf. And we've been working really hard to be a data set that can go through the entire life cycle. It's not siloed in just talent acquisition, or it's not just siloed in succession planning. So taking kind of this really strong foundation of us having data for everybody on every role and matching them to the best roles where they'll be happy, filled, and thrive. But now how do you contextualize that in a day-to-day interaction? How do you make that individual, as they're trying to lead their own career development and their own growth, how do you give them all the tools to take this data and provide that success every day? And so I think that generative AI is an opportunity for data to be more interactive on a day-to-day basis and more helpful for that individual on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's a great opportunity, but it's an opportunity to do things better and differently, not an opportunity to double down on the past, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And what people have more tools than ever before. And I'd love to see some of this filter its way down more into schools where people get a little more exposure to, what do these organizations actually do? Because most people have no clue. Like, I want to be in marketing, right? Or I want to be an accountant. They get into these organizations and there's hundreds of jobs that they just never even considered. They had no clue they even existed, right? So bring your child to work day is kind of a little bit passe, right? But those are the kinds of things that getting people more starting to understand what that world looks like before they get there could also be helpful in terms of figuring out where you want to land or how you want to contribute to the organization.
I think that's the right way to be thinking about it. One of the organizations we work with actually is very much connected to the Take Your Kids to Work, and they're trying to reimagine what that looks like in 2023 and beyond. How do you talk to a ninth grader about their career? And they were thinking about exposing them to different career types. I remember when I was in grade 9, I was like, I want to be an engineer. Why? Because something said engineer on some survey I filled out, and I can tell you I would have been a horrible engineer. Like, thank goodness I eventually figured that out before going off to university. But engineering that's not how my brain is wired. I thrive in chaos. So that
sounded cool.
Yeah. It sounded cool. It sounded like it was good, but that's not how we should be talking to 13, 14-year-olds about their career. We should be talking about those, even them. Like, if you're a parent, you can see that each of your kids, there's something special about them that just makes them different than their siblings, makes them different than their friends. How do they lean into that thing that makes them exceptional? And how do they think about the day-to-day activities that would utilize those things that make them special? And then translate all the different types of careers, all the different types of industries, all the different types of work environments that could support them doing that. Because it's not about training to be an engineer or a nurse or a teacher. It's about really getting that self-awareness and understanding how to communicate and leverage it, and understanding that the type of jobs that are going to be available, the titles don't exist yet. But if we start thinking about it from a behavioral standpoint and what behaviors are you going to use on a daily basis, we would be setting them up for far greater success. And if we know that's the advice that we should be giving ninth graders, how are we future-proofing our organizations to be the ones that are going to go after that talent? Because by the time they enter the workforce, there's going to be even less people to fill all of those jobs. And yes, we are going to have advancements where efficiencies are improving and things are getting automated. So maybe we need less people, but you're always going to have growing. Your company's always going to grow. You're always going to need more bodies. So like, are we really thinking about designing ourselves to attract the best kids 6 years from now? Because that's how long it is from 14 to 20, like from grade 9 to starting to enter those people into your workforce. That's not a lot of time to shift how we're doing things and to start mirroring it with our existing employees that will go to a better employer that is adapting faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And we teach tons of technical skills. Like, that's not the hard part, right? We can teach anybody the technical skills of things. That's what colleges and the schools do.
Yeah.
It's the behavioral side of things and sort of the watching what people do and are capable of, because many of those technical skills are transferable as well. So yeah, I think it's a whole new world, and it's going to be interesting to see how things change in the next 10 years. If there was one thing you could leave people today with in terms of, as an organization, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, how do I get this rolling in my work? How do I get people thinking about things this way? How do I start to look at the world a little bit differently to help us solve this problem? What advice would you give them? Something they could do today or tomorrow that would just start them down this path?
Yeah, Terry, we'll give you a link that you can put in with this. People can go ahead and take their own free Plum profile. We'll unlock what you would get as an employee, which is a full professional development guide called a talent guide. So we'll give that to your readers. And the reason for it is that it starts with your own self-awareness. Do you understand what makes you exceptional? And are you using it on a daily basis? Are you communicating when you're having your one-on-ones? Or do you know this about your direct reports? So really getting a handle on, this is not your Myers-Briggs assessment. This is not stuff that was developed after World War II. In 2023, we have really cutting edge science. Industrial organizational psychology has come a long way in terms of really being able to quantify what will make you happy and make you want to stay and grow in a role. And so using this data firsthand and being up to date with what it looks like in a modern context, I think is one of the best things that people can do from a self-education, because then by using it, they can advocate for it. So I think that's definitely a place to start, and share it with your colleagues, have conversations, start incorporating this data in how you're thinking about your strategic planning, because you had to go through consultants before. This used to be a very expensive, labor intensive lift. So a lot of people, like back to the competency models, people liked a lot of things about competency models, but they sat on a shelf with dust. They were really expensive, hard to do. They came outdated. So it's not that the principles behind it were bad. It was the execution. Well, execution, all of this stuff has improved greatly in the last decade. So making sure that you're up to speed on understanding how to take an approach of, when you're trying to become a skills-based organization, start with the behavioral skills, because that's what's going to have the longest shelf life. That's what's going to be the most predictive of success and retention. And so start firsthand incorporating this, I think, is a great next step.
Yeah, love it. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. I can think of some ways that we could expand this conversation later on down the road. Where can people find you on social and online?
Yeah, so they can go to hello@plum.io and it'll eventually come to me, or Caitlin, Caitlin @plum, plum.io, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Caitlin McGregor. So happy to connect with people and answer questions. And hopefully people will go and create their own Plum profile and share it on LinkedIn and talk to your friends about it and try to incorporate that data into your day-to-day use.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Thanks to our producers, Brand Method Media Group, and our marketing team. And thank you for listening. That's it for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. Also, we'd love it if you leave us a review. And you can also drop us a line or schedule a chat on the website. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you.